We come to the summer solstice of 2014. This is the 25th presentation in a year-long excursion of the Parayana, which is a new form, a new presentation of the Great Way. And next week will be the 26th presentation, which will be the middle, the pivot of the year. The 26th and 27th will be like a double chiral pivot for the year's presentation of the Parayana, which is original. The term Parayana comes from the short sutras of the classical Buddha. And in that series, usually they were quite short, but the one called Parayana collected 16 of these short presentations together as resonances of a set. And at that early date, some 2,500 years ago, the Parayana was the discovery by the meditative resolution of the historical Buddha that one could get down to the subatomic structure of thought, that the moment of thought, a moment of thought, the atom of intelligence in the mind, in the brain. The Sanskrit word for that was a chitta, or sita, chitta. But that there was the ability to hone one's meditation, one's dhyana, through the sustenance of one's dana, one's sila, one's kshanti, one's virya, one's dhyana, to achieve prajna. And wisdom is being able to have one pointedness of thought, and that rests not just on a chitta, but on the chitta, and the historical Buddha called that the bodhicitta, the thought of enlightenment, or the atom of atomic structure of the mind, and then went subatomic. And in the Parayana, he found that there were 16 parts, if you will, to the chitta, to the bodhicitta, which was transparent, so he could see into the subatomic structure of thought. And it is possible, indeed. There he found that only 8, half of the 16, have the ability to be discursive. That is, to be able to take form in space-time. That the other 8 do not take form in space-time. So they are not discursive. They are not particles. The other 8 are particles. But those 8, other 8, always act as a wave of energy, not taking particality, not becoming discursive. So that there is always a spacing between the particles that allows for the context, the field within which thought occurs, obtains, has its being and its movement, and it is that background that is the context for being able to think clearly that the single pointedness in Sanskrit is called ekagrata, Ekagrata means being able to focus infinitesimally on thusness. In Tibetan, thusness is ivam. And all sutras begin, thus have I heard. And in Tibetan, ivam, the thusness, is the bodhicitta of being able to see the 8 parts of discursive wave and particle structure of the atom of the mind. And it is the non-discursive 8 as the resonance of a set, a harmonic, within an infinite field of consciousness that then constitute the wave form of what in English translation the Tibetan calls clear light. In particality, the carrier of the energy wave is the photon. The photon was first as a particle carrier of electromagnetic energy wave, was found by Albert Einstein mathematically in 1921 in the general theory of relativity, but was not named until 1926 by Gilbert Lewis, the photon. So that light is an arbiter of the electromagnetic energy in the universe, but in the magnetoelectric spectrum of the universe, it is clear light. It is the non-discursive 8-fold that is the invisible, unexpressible, unnameable, unpointably. It does not have a there that is there. It has a there which is everywhere, and one can even find it in the high Dharma of the Hermetic tradition in the 13th century, in the 1200s, where Roger Bacon was quite refined to be able to say that in reality, the divine is the center of a circle which is infinite, and thus the center is everywhere, anywhere, outside of time. There is a classic book of Roger Bacon's called A Perspectiva, and the first, it was in Latin from the 1200s, and the first translation of it into English was done by David C. Lindbergh of the University of Wisconsin, where I'm an alumni of some 5 years, back in the 50s and early 60s. And David C. Lindbergh published his English translation, about 500 some pages, by Oxford University Press in 1996. Very few people have taken the time to actually read it. David C. Lindbergh's library came up for sale here in the Los Angeles area a couple of years ago. A good friend of mine, one of the great rare book dealers in the world, Jeff Weber, had bought David C. Lindbergh's library, and through Jeff, I was able to buy a number of Lindbergh's books. No copy of his own Oxford book, and as soon as I have a couple of $100 extra, I will get a copy. It is the 8-fold path that is like Murray Gell-Mann's the 8-fold structure of the quark quality of the subatomic particles in the universe, but the invisible 8 are not 8 so much, but they always occur, and the phrase I used to use 30 years ago, when first talking about this, they do not occur as like the 8 notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, where the octave is a sound, is a musical harmonic of the 8 that can be expressed. But the 8 that cannot be expressed, I came to style as intervals. They are intervals that, quote, punctuate, and in this, quote, punctuation, there is clarity in what is being discursively expressed, so that one note does not just fall into a cascade with another note, but the 2 notes are related together because they both interface with an interval that does not participate in their individuality, does not interfere in their resonance in a harmonic, and thus one can have not only speech, but one can have singing, one can have a poetic, one can have praise. If you know how to punctuate, especially between the particality of the syllables and being able to put some syllables together to make complex words, or that there is a word that takes the whole spectrum of this particality, like Om. That syllable is a phoneme that is cosmic because Om, always written with an exclamation mark, Om, that it penetrates into the silence of the ineffable, of the perfection of wisdom, the prajna paramita of the context. In this, the movement is not that of walking, it's that of gliding in the sense of coursing. And so the classic way in which it was expressed early on in India, when the Mahayana first began, when the Great Way first began to get its encouragement, and the first English translation done by Edward Kanze in 1962 of the Prajna Paramita Ratnaguna Samkhya Gatha. It is he translates it as the accumulation of precious qualities. The Prajna Paramita is wisdom perfected, the perfection of wisdom. Ratna Guna means the jewel of the fundamental characteristics of being, the gunas. In the Bhagavad Gita, there are 3 gunas. And the Samkhya is all of the ways, and the Gatha is the hymn of praise, the song, the hymn, the poem, the ode of praise. So I use, in the learning civilization, 8 phases that present the 8 discursive parts of an octave, the notes, as you would. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And so as the octave rises, the second do is not a repeat of the first do, but is on one level higher, one registry more. No matter what the registry is, it is one more. It is up. And so the classic outlaw wisdom phrase is always onwards and upwards. Onwards to complete the 7 notes that can be sounded on this level together And the eighth, which does not belong to what you can sound on that level, but to a new level, which then begins a new octave. And so you can have overlapping octaves. A piano has 11. Then you can really play something like Mozart. And so enlightenment is not a question of raising awareness at all. Centipedes can be aware. Deer can be enormously alert, aware. It is a question, as Kanzi translates the Prajna Paramita Ratnaguna Samkhya Gaza, a part of it. No wisdom can we get hold of, no highest perfection. No bodhisattva, no thought of enlightenment either. Nowhere in them they find, in form, in feeling, will, perception, and awareness, nowhere in them they find a place to rest on. There's no rest. There's no arrival. One of Jesus's great techniques in presenting the way is he characterized it as finding my rest. Where I rest is not mine, it's not a there, it's everywhere, distributed infinitely. And so there is no rest in feeling, in will, in perception, in awareness, in form. Without a home, they wander. Bodhisattvas wander. Dharmas never hold them. Truths are not their anchors. They have set sail. Nor do they grasp at them. They use the term here in the Sanskrit, jina, which means victor. The jina's bodhi, that is the victor's awakening, enlightenment. The jina's bodhi they are bound to gain. The wanderer Sranika in his gnosis of the truth. Sranika was not a monk. He was not a part of the Sangha. He was a wandering genius by himself, and he would from time to time come into and go out of the Sangha before the historical Buddha. And one time he realized that there is no rest in these things, and so he says to the Buddha, I will put my rest in you, the Tathagata. Tathata in Sanskrit is suchness, and gata, it's like any European word cognate with it, is gone. Gata, gone. Suchness, gone. The Tathagata is not he, but the presentation of a suchness gone, able to speak discursively because the emphasis is not on what can be specified in the notes, but the emphasis is on in between the notes, the other 8, who 30 years or so more ago I used to call a trill. They do not occur as notes. They occur as a silent trill. And this silent trill is an infinite cascade of silence. Not a dead silence, but a fertile silence, because it gives the discursive quality of particality a context within which they can be as they are. So that there is a very, very special kind of equality. About 1,500 years after the historical Buddha lived, a brilliant yogi in India. His name was Tilopa. And Tilopa was like Srinika. He was a wild card. He was an outlaw, a yogic outlaw of immense capacity and refinement and quality. And he spoke in such a way that almost no one was able to get what he was saying, to understand what he was expressing, to finally harvest what must be there, until another genius participated with Tilopa in what he was speaking. And that other one was named Naropa. And Naropa, when he was participating with Tilopa, understood that the perfection quality had 6 radiants that were able to continue from the particality of 8 to the trill of the invisible non-occurrence 8ness of infinity. And so these 6, which were the paramitas, the perfections. The first one is dana, gifting, giving. The highest charity in the Western tradition is called charity. The highest charity wrote Moses Maimonides in the 1200s. He was a late 11, early 1200s. He was a contemporary of Roger Bacon. The highest charity is that no one knows who received and no one knows who gave. It is an open cascade of pure givingness. Another contemporary of Bacon, Roger Bacon, and Moses Maimonides was Ibn Arabi in Spain, in Andalusia. Sufi, one of the greats. So the 1200s is one of the really great centuries of high genius. If Naropa could understand that the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections, were able to be presented or taught, as the colloquial way would be, as yogas, that there would then be the classic, and it's translated into English, in the life and teachings of Naropa, the 6 yogas of Naropa. The translator was Herbert Gunther. Herbert Gunther. Herbert was married to Ilse, and they were German, and eventually made their way to Western Canada, to a very far north, one of the farthest north cities in Canada, into Saskatoon, in the province of Saskatchewan. Saskatoon's on the Saskatoon River. At about the same time that I was in Western Canada, in the province next to Saskatchewan, a little further south in Calgary. And there was an occasion where Professor Gunther came down from Saskatoon to Calgary in the midst of winter. In fact, I think it was around the winter solstice. And it was he gave a talk on the 6 yogas of Naropa. And it was a brutal night in Calgary. It was about 30 to 35 below zero. And when you would be driving to where the lecture was going to be given, it was at the University of Calgary, the exhaust plumes of the cars would be suspended in the air, white plumes everywhere. And of course the headlights of the cars shining through all of these suspended plumes, which then were condensing into particality because it's gasoline fumes, produced rainbows. And so there was a cascade of rainbows citywide in 400,000 people city on the night that he talked about the 6 yogas of Naropa. That's about as good as it gets. Here is from Gunther's translation of one of Naropa's songs. This is about how Tilopa taught him, Naropa, about not paying attention to anything that you can't attend to and letting it occur. This is transcendent awareness, cognizant in itself. Beyond the path of speech, the object of no thought, I, Tilopa, have nothing at which to point. Knowing this as pointing itself to itself. This quality of being attentive has its origins in the way in which I used to transform the frame of reference into the square of attention. Once you have dropped the language, the ideation, the application, the vocabulary, the grammar, the syntax, etc. Once you have gone into a kind of a meta-linguistics, the father of linguistics, Roman Jacobson, was an absolute genius, but his structure of linguistics was not based upon academic. He was from St. Petersburg, from Leningrad, and his friends were like the poet Mayakovsky and so forth, and so he grew up as sort of this highfalutin, intelligent bohemian in Russia, and eventually made his way to the United States and taught, then founded the Department of Linguistics. And these Harvard-type qualities eventually led to his collected works being published in 9 huge red volumes. I have a set. Very rare. Only if you knew what was going on in the world, would you even know that such a thing was, and what it was. Then read it. One of his, Roman Jacobson's great triumphs, his wife did a series of interviews of him called Dialogues, which I use in The Learning Civilization, in one of the 8 phases. He named that sound in its syllabic subatomic structure, the phoneme, is the way in which an analytic of language can proceed. Because once you have the subatomic particles that you can not just identify, but that you can attend to, that you can put within the square of attention, that square of attention has a chiral quality to it. If you do a diagonal through the square of attention, you get 2 Pythagorean right angle triangles that have the same hypotenuse. So they are pivotal on the diameter of the hypotenuse, and the square then becomes an analytic tool par excellence. Because now one has the ability to do a differential geometry, not just a Euclidean geometry, but a differential geometry. Because they're not just angles. In geometry, an angle is just 1/4 of the crosshatch within the frame of reference. Usually the upper right corner. But in differential geometry, you have a diagonal that brings in the entire square of attention so that one can attend to what can be specified in particality, but also not be aware of, but be consciously participant with what is non-discursive in that magnetoelectric field This is called high Dharma. One of the qualities of this language comes from a book that was written by the man who took the way of Jesus to India in 41 AD, and his name was Thomas, Venerably St. Thomas. And the Gospel, according to Thomas, was excerpted, kicked out, booted from the New Testament, where it was one of the constituent original Gospels in the 1st century AD. Almost as soon as Thomas left for India, he left for India with his very close good friend St. Matthew, because Matthew and Thomas and Philip were the three who were able to listen to Jesus, not just to what he was saying, but what he was saying on the level of subatomic phonemes, the very syllables, so that they could also appreciate the quality of what couldn't be included in that kind of particality, subatomic, analytic, but that the spaces in between were part of the cosmic infinite field of vision. And with that kind of vision, language now becomes song. It has its own musicality, its own poetic, and every quality of expression becomes a poetic. Even if it seems like it's prose, it's a poetic prose. Here is from the Gospel according to Thomas. Matthew was going down to Ethiopia at the same time that Thomas was going to India. So they went on the same kind of shipping down the Gulf of Aqaba to the Red Sea, all the way down the Red Sea, and shifted in Ethiopia to a port that went out to the island of Socotra. And there they waited for the special winds, like the Etesian winds and the Mediterranean, that you can go in 9 days instead of 9 weeks, all the way to Alexandria from southern Italy, from the boot of Italy. Well, you can go across the Indian Ocean, across the Arabian Sea, as it were, from western India to eastern Africa, from Ethiopia to India, in just a very short number of days, instead of having to go on the coastline of the Arabian Peninsula, along the coastline of what is Gedrosia, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so forth, all the way. One can go directly from Ethiopia to India, and you come down in the south of India. And that's how Thomas, leaving Matthew to spread the gospel in Ethiopia, Queen Candace was a descendant of the Queen of Sheba, whose son Menelik, by her and Solomon, was the inheritor of the Ark of the Covenant. And so they wanted to have the new queen, Candace, like the Old Testament queen of Sheba, that Candace learned from her caravan head, who had been in Palestine, and the Apostle Philip had come to him and said, do you know what you're reading? He'd seen him in his chariot reading the Hebrew in his Bible. And he said, do you know what you're reading? And he replied in Hebrew, yes, I do know what I'm reading. I can read it very well. And so Philip said to him, well, then you must know what has happened just now. That a whole new echelon has occurred just now. And he said, what is it? And Philip told him and filled him in. And so the caravan leader, tall, black Ethiopian, said, well, there's water over there. Can I not be baptized by you over there? And Philip said, yes, you certainly can. And so they went over. And so the caravan leader was the first Ethiopian, the first African, baptized by St. Philip. And so St. Matthew, because he was close to Philip and Thomas, the three of them were the ones who were there to write down the living words of Jesus, the words of the living Jesus. And so Matthew went there, and of course he brought not only his own gospel he had just finished, but he brought the gospel of Thomas as well, and he brought the gospel of Philip as well. And that's how they turned up later on in the cache of documents in Egypt that became the Nag Hammadi find. And later on, when Pentius in Alexandria found that there was no good edition of the Gospel of Matthew had been messed with already by 150 AD, already unrecognizable because it didn't have the tone that opened to infinity. There was no rest in it. And so Pentius made his way to India, to South India. He knew there would have been a basic text of Matthew untampered with there, and he found it and made a copy and brought it back to Alexandria and founded the catechetical school. And among his first students was Clement of Alexandria. We'll come back after a short break, but you can see that it's a cascade of perfection of wisdom. In a little bit, we'll continue.